Welcome to this week's episode of the Digital Drop podcast. Today, I'm joined by a highly accomplished and seasoned leader from within the membership sector, Professor Adam Boddison, OBE. The topic of today's discussion is the membership growth class or masterclass. And more specifically, we're going to be talking about how Adam doubled revenue in one particular organization he was involved with in just 2 years. Welcome to the show, Adam. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for the invitation.
Excellent. So, Adam, I'm really keen to pick your brains and get a little bit of insight from you as to how membership organizations can overcome some of the more common challenges that you've seen and have overcome yourself previously throughout your career. And we're going to be honing in specifically on a particular role that you had where you've had some specific results. But before we go into that, I think it would be great for our listeners to understand a little bit more about you and the journey that's brought you to where you are today. So how did you even end up in this sector, and was it planned?
Well, it's a really good question. Was it planned? No. I ended up in the membership sector by accident. And in fact, many colleagues that I know at very senior levels in the membership sector, when I talk to them, they have a similar story where, it wasn't something that when they were at school, they said, you know what, when I grow up, I want to run a professional membership association. It wasn't really in the plan, but it kind of happened. And I think that's quite common. In my case, my background was as a teacher, actually, as a school teacher, as an educationalist. I worked in university and ran teacher training courses and education research facilities and so on. So very, very much an education background. And really my first step into a membership organization proper was when I became chief exec of the National Association for Special Educational Needs. And really the reason I made that move was because working in a university was interesting because they're such big institutions that when you do a good job, they say, yeah, do a good job again next year. Do it even better. There's no real reward for doing a good job. It's just give us more, right? And if you do a bad job, they're often such big institutions that they can kind of bankroll when things don't go well and just make, and they just say, look, don't do that again. So there was no real risk and no real reward. And so what I wanted to do was to work in a sector where you kind of live or die by the decisions that you make. And when you're talking about membership associations, which are often also charitable organizations, you've really got to get it right. There's no second chances. You've got to get it right. And there are so many members who care passionately, profoundly about their membership associations. There's a lot of pressure to get that right. So that was what got me excited. So I ran the National Association for Special Educational Needs, NASN, as we call it, for 6 years. And I then moved over to the Association for Project Management as chief exec. It's my current role, and I've been there for about 3.5 years. And I suppose the move from NASN to APM was really because NASN was very specialist as an association. It was about special educational needs and disability. And whilst I wasn't a special needs or disability expert, having been there for 6 years, other people were labeling me as an expert. And I thought, well, that's very nice, but I don't really want that to be the only thing I'm known for. So I deliberately wanted to do something broad. But by that time, I got the membership association bug, right? So I wanted to look for a member association that was broad, and project management has that breadth. It's every sector, and it still has that kind of societal impact, behind it as well.
Yeah, the membership vertical it's a very unique vertical. I often say it's the only vertical that comprises of all other verticals. So it is a very unique sector that brings its own challenges. But I would say there is some commonality in my experience between the academic institutes and the membership institutes. Would you say that there's been kind of a healthy transition in terms of your experience and background that you gained in the academic sector, and how has that helped you within the membership sector?
Yeah, look, there are by there are for sure transferable skills and transferable contexts, if I call it that, because at the end of the day, professional bodies and learned societies and so on, they are there also to keep their members up to date. They're often about qualifications and standards, and that's often what universities are about, right? And the research piece is similar as well. We commission research as professional bodies into our particular areas of interest, and often working with the academic institution. So it was a really good grounding, and also in some kind of less obvious ways as well. So the commercial side, people outside of the university sector probably wouldn't think of those as institutions that were quite commercially switched on, but they have to be. At the end of the day, they're huge organisations. And the students and research side of just one aspect often of universities. They often have big estates departments. The big retail organisations that they're running within their portfolio. They've often got lots of spin-off companies and things like that. So there's all kinds of things. So that commercial background that I got from the academic sector was also very helpful. Because if there's one thing that I think all membership associations would benefit from a huge, healthy dose of, it's even more commercial input. I often think that's one of the under-resourced parts of membership associations.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. Talking more to that, ultimately, we're talking about generating revenue within these organizations. And within a lot of these organizations, it's almost like a taboo topic to be discussing how do we get more money out of our members. But of course, the whole point of any organization is to make a profit so we can improve the services that it's doing. Have you, because with your background, when you came into the sector within the roles, was it a hurdle to overcome getting the rest of the stakeholders on board with this vision that the focus needs to be revenue predominantly?
It's really interesting. There is this view sometimes that commercials are kind of dirty word,
Yeah.
And I think that's because people don't really understand what commercial means. They think commercial means it's profit and it's about ripping people off and overcharging for things and all that. And actually, that's not what it's about. Commercial for me is about running a sustainable organisation that can continue to give back to its customers, and especially when you're talking about non-profits. It's not like we've got a board of shareholders who are going to take money out of the organisation. As you said, any money we get goes back into delivering better services and so on. So there's sometimes that hurdle to tackle. But interestingly, in both of the two professional bodies I've talked about, the two membership associations, we didn't have any KPIs, the key performance indicators, related to finance. None at all. So the focus was always on customer experience, value propositions. It was on making sure we have the right products that they're delivering to a high quality. It was about member satisfaction, those types of things. It was almost a kind of side effect, if you like, that actually when you get those things right, then the revenues improve and then you've got more money to invest and you can get into digital transformation and all those things. And this was really successful. I mean, at Nascent, to put kind of some of this in context, and you set a little bit about this out in your introduction. Now, I was there for 6 years. When I started there, they were in quite a difficult situation. I had about 3,000 members. They were losing money. 95% of their revenue was from membership fees, but that was going down, the number of members that they had. And I was kind of brought in on a remit of cut the costs, please cut the costs. And I said, look, we can do that, but that's basically a slow death. If ever there was a rainy day to invest the reserves, this is the rainy day that we've been saving up for. And we went through a revenue diversification process, made the membership free. And that took our membership numbers over 6 years from 3,000 to 45,000, so a 15-fold increase in membership. And you might say, yeah, but what about the revenue? Because that was where all the revenue was coming from. The revenue in that same period went from 1 million to 5 million in terms of per year. And none of that was coming from membership in the end. It was about leveraging the number of members that we had. And I've not been there for 3.5 years now, but that growth has continued, and they're now on to well in excess of 100,000 members, and the organisation's still doing well. So that gives you some context, and in APM where I am now, again the focus has not particularly been on make more money. But when I started, it was a 10.5 million revenue per year. This year we'll hit 18 million, and next year we're going to hit 21 million. So it gives you some sense of the pace of growth that you can achieve by focusing on the right things.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's almost counterintuitive, isn't it? But what a brave decision for you to decide to give the only source of revenue pretty much away for free, and then find other ways of replacing that revenue.
Well, you say brave, but in a sense, I'm not actually convinced there was another choice. I think it was about getting people to accept that there is no other option. We either carry on doing what we're doing, and the old phrase, right? You do what you've always done, you get what you've always got, right? It's a very, very famous expression. We would have strung out the organisation for a few more years probably, but at some point we then would have had to make the same decision, but with less resource to be able to do it. So in some ways, the boldness of the board at that time, and I must commend the chair of the board, a lady called Elaine Simpson, who has a mixed kind of education, commercial background, and she was really had my back in terms of saying, look, this is the right thing to do. And so we had the board and the executive all saying, right, you've got to make this work. And if you've read, obviously Stephen Bartlett, if you've read his book, The Diary of a CEO book, one of the things he talks about in there is if ever there's a plan B, it kind of waters down your chances of being successful with plan A. This is a good example of where there was no plan B, right? We had to make it work. Otherwise, we were done. That really focuses hearts and minds, I'll tell you now.
Well, yeah, it's when things become a must, it's the only way you give it your best shot, right? So obviously, membership fees are one of the main revenue streams for most membership organizations. But I agree with you. There's some cases where giving membership away for free opens up a community and a certain channel that creates additional revenue opportunities. How could you tell us a little bit more about how or with what was that revenue replaced and then expanded? So how did you go from getting rid of the membership fees, and how did you monetize the organization following on from that?
Sure. And actually, in both organizations, it's been done in a slightly different way. So the one where we removed membership fees altogether, essentially the context, just to give a bit of a background for this, the members of that organization were effectively special needs coordinators based in schools in England, a little bit in England and Wales, but primarily in England. And the reality is, if anybody who's listened to the news even this morning, schools have no money. So this wasn't about quality of the product. The product was good quality. The membership represented good value. But actually, if schools haven't got the money to spend in the first place, it doesn't matter how valuable it is; they can't afford it, right? So effectively, what we did is made that membership free. There was already a kind of buried demand there, if you like, and a kind of inbuilt demand. So that demand was there, which is why we got that really accelerated growth, that kind of 3,000 to 45,000, and then to 100,000 really quickly. But to replace that revenue, which is, I think, the $1 million question here, a couple of things. So one, once you've got a membership which is very representative of the sector you're talking about, particularly if it's a public sector like schools and teaching and so on, it then puts you in a really helpful position to be able to advocate and to talk to government on behalf of those members. And government actually wanted special needs in schools to be able to be delivered better, more cost effectively and so on. And the amount it would cost for them to fund us as an organisation to provide resources and professional development and so on for the workforce in a very targeted way was far more cost effective than it would be for them to try and do that via local authorities and eventually getting out to 24,000 schools. So actually the government saved money, but they provided that money to us in the form of grants and contracts and so on, which replaced some of our revenue and actually also funded some of the very services we wanted to provide anyway. So, we were able to kind of get some government contracts of that type of work going. We also looked internationally because British education, whatever we might think of it here, and we're quite critical of it, the truth is it's the envy of the world. So when you look at governments in other countries, they will pay to replicate some of what's happening in the British education system in other parts of the world. So we looked at consultancy around international consultancy around working with governments overseas. And by the way, an interesting statistic here, which I discovered at the time working with particularly British schools overseas, so British international schools, there are more British schools overseas than there are state schools in the UK. I mean, if you that is absolutely staggering. I mean, admittedly, some of them are very small schools, right? So there is I'm not saying there's the same number of pupils, but what that does is it tells you that the market for the services can be broader than just the UK. So that was the kind of nascent one where we removed the membership and so on. And it did take some time to build that up. We also introduced a bit like when you buy your kind of annual pass for your online shopping delivery. Rather than charging for individual professional development, we brought out a kind of annual pass, so you pay for your CPD, which schools often do have some budget for, and they pay for an annual pass, and then they got access to all of the CPD. So some commercially smart moves like that also helped. When it came to APM, that was slightly different. So APM, we still have the membership, and I say contributes about a third of our revenue every year. But it's not the main part of our revenue. Qualifications and standards forms the bulk of our revenue. And the lesson I learned from that really, for organisations where membership is the main revenue stream, is that when you have all your eggs in one basket like that, it only takes one hiccup and the whole thing could fall over. It's really high risk, I would say, in terms of likelihood of something going wrong. So I think having that, it doesn't have to be qualifications, but having something else that sits alongside membership that brings in as much, potentially a bit more than membership, I think is just generally a good thing to do from a revenue diversification perspective.
Yeah, I must say, Adam, it's really refreshing to speak to a leader within the sector who's so commercially minded, and it's even more surprising considering your background's been in academic and not-for-profit sectors and not in the private sector. But what I've found over the past 15 years in working with various membership organizations is that one of the biggest hurdles we have in taking these organizations to the next stage of their evolution, let's say, is in the leadership. So in our industry, what we've learned is that, for an organization to be successful in adopting technology and transforming through the use of that technology, this needs to be driven from the very top, and it needs to be an approach that's passed top down within an organization. In so many, I would actually say the majority of membership organizations, what we see is, essentially a digital transformation board or a group of mid-management stakeholders that are trying to push the agenda of investment in technology. But one of the big hurdles is convincing the leadership. So it's, when you have senior leadership that's got this level of commercial acumen, it becomes a lot easier to do. To what extent have you faced the same challenges when it comes to mindset and culture within these organizations, and how that contradicts to your approach?
Yeah. So I think it's a really interesting observation that you've made around the kind of middle management, kind of the evangelists for technology, if I call them that. Yeah. And I think that always exists. It doesn't matter how commercially minded or how digitally engaged the leadership is. there will always be others in the organization who want to take it further. And I have it in my organization now. There are definitely, no matter how fast we go on it, there are people that want us to go faster. But there's also this other bunch of people that say it's too fast. And trying to get, I think pace is one of these important things. And I think it's particularly acute, this pace problem, when it comes to digital transformation, technology, and so on. I find our customers tell us that we're not going quickly enough when it comes to digital transformation, and our staff say we're going way too fast. Maybe that means we've got it about right. Who knows? Or we'll see. Ask me again in 5 years, and I'll tell you whether we got the right answer. But I think the point actually is less about the kind of buy-in, and I think it's more about thinking about what we call APM future customer experience rather than current customer experience, because in order to really accelerate growth and to survive, you need to be thinking about what are your customers going to look like in 3, 4, 5, 10 years time, and where are they now, and what are they interested in, what are their trajectories, and you've got to try and prepare for that, and that often then drives the priorities for things like digital transformation. Where I see mistakes happening, and I've seen them happening in other places, is where the digital transformation is to fix today's problem rather than tomorrow's problem, and so by the time you've done it, you're back in the same issue again. So I don't know if this is a real association, so my apologies if it is. But if you imagine the association of professional typists back in the day, when there were secretaries and lots of secretaries in lots of organisations, that doesn't really exist now. If all they'd done is invested in digital transformation to help typists to type faster or better, or but they hadn't really modernized to say, actually, this is going to be a very different space in 5 years time. You can see how that it would create an existential crisis for an organization. Now I use that as a slightly facetious example, but you can see almost for any membership association how if they're not thinking about tomorrow's customers, they're going to end up in a difficult situation quite quickly.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And, I personally don't like the phrase digital transformation. We have coined the phrase digital evolution as an alternative. And the reason being is that the word transformation in its own right suggests transforming something from one state to another state. And like you just said, what that ultimately ends up is creating an approach where the organizations are treating digital transformation as a one-off project, as a one-off event, and not recognizing that this needs to be a continual evolution and continual investment.
Yeah.
To what extent would you say technology is a blocker to an organization's growth, and to what extent would you say the culture within an organization is a blocker to technological development?
Wow, they're two very big questions. Well, let me try and deal with the first one first before we get into culture. So I think technology, we obviously know it can be an enabler. We obviously know that once you've got the buy-in and everything else. But the reality is in every organization I've ever worked in, and this is not just in the membership sector, there are often issues around technical debt. And that's true in my current organization as well. And that is a barrier to scaling, because, you have maybe a CRM that only works in a particular way, and people have learned all of these weird workarounds and so on. And if you were, or it's been kind of built up in layers over time, rather than, if you were building it from scratch now, you never would have built it like that type of thing. Yeah. So before you can even get onto the transformation, the evolution, whatever we want to call it, you've got to deal with this technical debt. And that is really hard for organizations, because the business case for, investing in the future is easy, right? We're going to make our organization better. The business case for saying, let's fix this kind of problem of the past almost, is really hard to make, because it's almost like a sunk cost, which you're not really going to see the benefits of straight away. But actually, that's the thing that really does enable the growth. So I have a saying that I use, which is that any change that we're going to make must be replicable, scalable, and sustainable. That's not my phrase. I pinched it from somewhere, but it's really, really helpful. And what that means is you then start to make changes and judge the business case of changes that you're going to make, not just on things like return on investment or something like that. You start to really judge it on the benefits and the scalability of your business going forward. So I think that's really helpful. But yeah, the technology can be a barrier as well. In terms of your second question around culture, I think APM's in a slightly fortuitous place on this because we're a project management professional body. We're quite interested in change and transformation, and I suppose we have a phrase: we have to eat our own toast. So we can't talk to everybody else about that and be not very comfortable with it ourselves. So I suppose we are slightly more comfortable with that than most. But even us, we there will be people that don't like change because it's different, and not for any good reason. And we have the same hurdles around that as every other organization. But that culture is important. One of the things that we have as part of our values in the organization is that we are a warm organization. Now, that's really unusual, I think. When I go to other organizations, I hear about, thoughtful and progressive and excellent and ambitious, all of these kind of really kind of bold values. And I thought, what is this warm value when I arrived at APM? And it's brilliant because what it does is it says, we're not just going to choose the right thing to do, but we're going to do it in the right way. We're going to treat people decently. We're going to give them the right working environment. So when it comes to making those really tough calls around maybe taking people down a path that they're reluctant to go down, do you know what? They come with us because they trust the organization. They know that we've got their back. We're not throwing them under the bus for the sake of the organization. We're bringing them with us on the journey. So it's a done with rather than a done to. So that's a good example, I think, of where when you get the culture right and the values right in an organization, again, that alongside tackling the technical debt and then getting the baseline of technology right can really set you up for success.
So you've said a very interesting phrase there, when you get the culture right. And just to dig a little bit deeper on that process, because, say you're a leader that's a visionary like yourself, you come in, you know what needs to be done, but you're faced with an organization that's set in its ways, a workforce that's been there for many, many years. And you recognize that there is a cultural problem within an organization. How do you optimize that team? So when you go into an organization and you've recognized all of these patterns and traits, how do you go about creating that ideal team? And is that possible without changing certain individuals within that team, or do you always have to have certain staff overhead to get that shift, so to speak?
Yeah, so I think you're asking me the question is, can do you have to change the people, or do you have to change the people? If I call it,
Yeah. Can you avoid changing the people?
Yeah, no, I understand. So look, I kind of think there's a pull from the top, push from the bottom type strategic approach to this. So if you're going to make any kind of big change in an organization as a leader, whether that be culture, whether it be around strategy, buy-in for any kind of big organizational change, you've got to have the board on board. Because if they're not backing you as the leader, it's going to come unstuck quite quickly. So I think that's the first thing to do. The second thing to do is to think about who are the champions for the change you're trying to make in the organization. And there will always be these kinds of evangelists. Now, some of them might have been downtrodden over the years if it's a particular hobby horse that they've had or whatever, but they're always there. They're always there. So all you've got to do is create the right environment for those people to start to come out. One of the things that I did when I started at APM was I hosted kind of meet the CEO conversations, and I picked groups of people who were not in teams from across the organization, small groups of half a dozen people, and I asked them 3 questions. Tell me one thing you love about the organization, one thing you hate about the organization, and one thing you think I should particularly focus on. That was all I asked them. And the insights you get from that are unbelievable, and people will tell you, especially early on, what they think. So you can use that to identify those evangelists and get those on board. So now you've got the board in place, you've got your evangelists in place. And then it's your senior leadership team. Okay, so this is where I think your question about do you have to change the people is important, because what I find with most people who are mature executives in an organization, they're going to go one of two ways when they see the leader has a particular mindset on something. They're going to go, you know what, I've got a pragmatic approach. I recognize this is right for the organization. It's not quite the way I would have done it, but you know what? It's my job to kind of back the leader. I'm going to get into this. And there will be others who say, I fundamentally can't get on board with this. And that's probably the only level at which I think you need to really seriously think about if you have to change the people, if you haven't got the right people. The truth is that once you've got those people in place, I think everybody else will then get behind it if you get the process right of rolling that out. And that process will be things like sharing ideas in advance, giving staff opportunities to contribute. Again, so it's a done with, so it's a co-produced kind of strategy rather than a done to strategy. And you build that up over a period of time and actually genuinely listen to what the objections are. So this is not about steamrolling an idea, because often I find when people have got objections, there's a good reason why they've got an objection. So you build that in. You build that in to actually address those objections, and you're really explicit about the fact that, you know what, we're doing this in this way because you raised this as a concern and we wanted to make sure that we listen to that. Now, sometimes there'll be objections that you say, well, you're wrong, or we don't agree, or whatever. And that's fine. Sometimes you've got to do that. And again, those people will make the decision. But I don't think you need to move those people on, because I think those people often tend to vote with their feet anyway if they really can't get on with it.
Okay, interesting. I think I wanted to touch a little bit on member engagement and providing value to your members, because going back to your previous example with what you achieved at NASAN, we often say that, look, the biggest telltale sign on what direction a membership organization is moving in is by looking at how well and how consistently it's engaging with its membership base, with its audience. And we often talk about how member engagement is the best way to identify and get additional revenue streams. Now, typically, the thought process is, by engaging with members more, you'll identify additional value that you can give to those members to get more revenue from those members. But in your example at NASAN, what was particularly interesting is that you gave the membership away for free. You increased your number of members, which gave you a bigger voice and made you a stronger representative of the sector, which then opened a revenue channel from the government, if I understood it correctly.
That's right, yeah.
So could you tell me a little bit more during that journey? Did you do anything to further increase member value and member engagement, or was it just a case of making it free did the trick to get everybody on board?
Yeah, I should just say a bit more about the making it free. We didn't just take the paid membership and make it free straight away, because the board wouldn't go with that straight away.
Yeah.
So what I actually did, to give a bit more detail in this, was I actually introduced a tiered membership, a bronze, silver, gold. Of the bronze membership, of which was free, the silver membership, which was broadly the same as what we'd had before, and a gold membership, which was like a premium service, which included things like the CPD pass and things like I talked about before. And what happened was everyone signed up for the free one. I'm saying everyone, but a lot of people signed up for the free one. And then what you end up with is a situation where the resource to sustain the income for the others doesn't make it worthwhile. And so that was the kind of transitionary state. But the reason I mention that is because, in order to kind of really understand what was going on in this, is it really just a money discussion? Is it about product purpose? What's it all about? What's going on there? We did have to increase our membership engagement. And I think the word engagement is really important, because some organizations I talk to, they think engagement means, I don't know, a number of emails they send to members, or something like that. And I think it has to be meaningful engagement. So I think about it's when members have actively done something rather than passively received something. That, for me, is a true point of engagement. So I don't know, if we sent a survey out and they responded to the survey, that would be engagement. If they come along to an event, that's engagement. So there has to be that active input. And when you start measuring that engagement at that level, often membership associations, I include some of the ones I've run in that, the numbers are pretty low. Now that could, you could be feeling really downhearted on that, but actually that means there's a lot of opportunity for growth, right? There's there's a lot of members to go after and so on. And it is really, you're right, it's really powerful, the insight that you get from members, because they will tell you exactly what they want and what they need. Very, very clear, and they will buy more. And once they start to engage with an organization, it switches it away from a kind of transactional type relationship to something much more purposeful. I could be a member of any organization, but I'm a member of this one because I care about it. And once you've got that emotional connection, actually, when times are hard and maybe you do need to increase the membership fees a bit more than you would have liked to, or you need to do things which might be unpopular, they'll stick with you. They'll stick with you through thick and thin because they care about the organization, and that's where the engagement gets you to. So I think that's really important, this membership engagement piece, really important.
Really, really fascinating answer, and in particular, what you touched on is the type of engagement. A lot of people just call engagement, and I think looking at the quality of that engagement is often overlooked. We are running a little bit out of time, but and I could speak to you for hours, Adam. I think there's so much I could learn from you here. But I will squeeze in just a couple of last questions. What I see time and time again with organizations undertaking digital transformation is that what they are trying to do is ultimately digitalize the existing way in which things are done and processes. And what I found a hurdle in getting across to a lot of our stakeholders is that, look, the whole point of digital transformation is using digital technology to transform the way in which your organization works, not to just reinforce the old ways of working. Mm-hmm. To what extent is success in digital transformation down to actually changing the organization rather than just digitalizing what's going on within the organization?
Yeah, I mean, both. I don't think you can pick one over the other, and I think they kind of coexist together. But I think if you do digital transformation or digital evolution without taking the opportunity to revisit, systems and processes, then it's a real missed opportunity, and an expensive missed opportunity as well. Because, as I said earlier on, like any organization, and particularly with membership associations, they've built up and layered over a period of time. So they often, if you look at the history of almost any membership association, they're like cottage industries. They started up with a bunch of volunteers that said, what we need some kind of body to back what we do and to kind of recognize what we do. And so it's volunteer led and often relies on a lot of goodwill from people. And then at some point they start to make enough revenue. They say, we can afford somebody to kind of do the admin for us here. And then at some point they say, we might get a marketer, and you can see it builds up to something which is much more of a mature organization. It's not like you've got, a huge financial capital investment at the beginning and you say, this is what a perfect company looks like, and you set it up for scaling from day one. It doesn't work like that. It's layered. So membership associations, I would say, are more vulnerable than most organizations for having some of those problems around processes, whereby they're the most convoluted processes known to man for all kinds of different reasons. And that opportunity when you're going to replace, I use the CRM as an example. We've just replaced our CRM. But when you take that opportunity to then say, what, when we, take payments from members, this is how we currently do it. If we were designing it from scratch, would we do it like that still? That's a really important opportunity. It's hard. It takes time and it adds complexity, unbelievable layers of complexity, but the payoff is worth it in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. So my final question, what I like to do as the last question in these conversations, is to ask you for your top 3 tips. And okay. I'm going to ask you for your top 3 tips to a peer, to somebody who's going in a senior leadership position to a membership organization, and their primary objective is to achieve growth within that organization. What are your top 3 tips or learnings?
Right. Okay. So first one, and I hinted at this earlier on, is listen to your future members. Some of those will be in your current membership, Lots of them will not be in your current membership. They're people who might come in if you get it right. And actually, some of those are still going to be in school, right? They're going to be so you've got to listen and think about what is it that they would want, and you build your value proposition based on what your future membership needs, not what your current membership needs. So that's number one. Number two, I would say overinvest in the technology. There's lots of conversation I often find in executive boardrooms and trustee boardrooms about what proportion of our revenue do we spend on human resources. There's not enough, in my opinion, conversation about what proportion of our revenue, of our expenditure do we put towards technology and technology investment, and what is the optimum amount that we'd want to get to. I think they're part of the same conversation, actually. So overinvest in the technology, number two. And number three, and this is a slightly pragmatic one, is as a senior leader, I think you have to pick your battles. And I say that they have to be small enough to win, but big enough to make a difference. And if they don't fall into that sweet spot, leave it well alone.
Great 3 tips that I think would be very useful, not just to leaders within the membership sector, I think leaders across the board. Okay, Adam, look, thank you so much for taking the time to have this chat with us. It's been an absolute pleasure getting to know you during this process, and I hope that we can have a few more of these in due course, because there's so many different topics that I'd love to discuss with you in a bit more detail at some point. So I have no doubt this has been very useful to all of our listeners. Thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure.
That's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me on, and absolutely happy to come back at some point in the future.
Excellent. Look forward to it.